Good morning and welcome to the Piedmont's 24th Annual Martin Luther King Day celebration. I'm Lois Karn, and yeah, it was me who got this party started. Back in the 90s, when my daughter Camille was in elementary school, I wanted her to know that Dr. King's birthday was about more than just getting a day out of school. I wanted to find a way for parents and children to learn more about Dr. King and celebrate what he was about. I brought a group of 30 Piedmont parents and children to the YMCA in West Oakland to hear a talk about race on King's birthday. And then when we got back, we had a potluck lunch at Beach Elementary School. And we kept the conversation going. Then after that, someone on the City of Piedmont's Community Relations Advisory Council, and I was on that too, had the idea to make the MLK Day celebration an annual event. So here we are, 24 celebrations later, holding up Dr. King's legacy of equity, justice, and the beloved community. This event is personal to me. My father, Malcolm Corrin, went to Morehouse College with Dr. King. They competed together on the debate team. Dr. King was a family friend, and one summer, my mother took me to meet Dr. King. He'd been invited to speak at Hampton University, and I was there with my family because my grandfather was Dean of Men. Dr. King picked me up and told my mother I was beautiful. Years later, I found out that King's paper landed at Stanford University, my alma mater. I thought it was a personal gift for me, but then I realized it was because of Claiborne Carson's brilliant scholarship. Before we begin today's program, we must acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral land of the Ohlone and Coquencho people. This is the foundation to help us pay respect to the Ohlone elders and their legacies. We are honored to have welcomed Grammy-nominated artist Vince Redhouse.
On this special day, I would like to recite a prayer that was written for a Native American blessing. And this prayer goes this way. It says, "We believe in the Creator, the Great Spirit, maker of Mother Earth and Father Sky, creator of seasons and all living things. We believe in Jesus Christ, a man of God, who lived with the courage of commitment, who sacrificed his life that the people may live for all people, all ages, for us. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the action love of the Great One and of Jesus, who breaks down barriers between people and empowers us to live and love one another. We believe in the community of committed and faith-filled people. We believe it is our task to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, justice and peacemakers, knowing that this calls us to the sacrifice of the cross. We believe in the power of the Great Spirit's presence as it fills our hearts, helping us to reach outward in the four direction to all people in need of healing. We believe in a just world, in equal rights for all. We believe in resurrection and in a more full life with the Creator in the world beyond. Amen. With four short words, Martin Luther King changed the world that we live in. He gave people the respect of knowing that they're a part of something that's greater than ourselves. greater than our diverse selves, our ethnicities, all the different things that divide people. And I was, as a young child, I heard the words, I have a dream, as I was being raised in Seaside, California. And those words did something to me, but I wouldn't realize what they actually meant until about 40 years later, when I was struggling with prejudice and the weight of it on my life. And then I looked in a mirror and I said, God, you created me this way, and you didn't make a mistake. I don't need to be ashamed of who I am. And because of that, I took the music that I was given and I began to play the native flute. And I want to very briefly play another song for you, for this day and for its meaning in my life, and all the things that day that Martin Luther King stood and said, I have a dream, that I can say I had a dream as well. And I'm sure you'll recognize this tune. And that's what it did to me. It enabled me to play the native flute and play jazz on a native flute. That was one of the things that Martin Luther King did. I have a dream. I had a dream to play jazz on this instrument, and I've done it. And so I'm very grateful to have been able to share that with you, and I hope this is a beautiful celebration for you all. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was absolutely amazing. Thanks so much, Vince. Good morning. I'm Richard Turner, School Liaison Co-Coordinator with the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee. I want to thank you, Vince, for that lovely rendition of Happy. And I want to thank both you and your wife for making this possible with a magnificent prayer and song. I met Diane several years ago after a pedicure that she got that went badly wrong, and she ended up in my urgent care center. And after a pleasant interaction, and I hope to say a favorable outcome, we had a long distance relationship. She, of course, introduced me to Vince and his amazing music. But this all lends to the idea that everything happens for a reason. And so here we are in a pandemic. Obviously, there are tremendous downsides to this pandemic: sickness, loss, and the dramatic impact it has had on the way that we come together. And of course, we would have preferred to do this celebration in person. However, circumstances has forced us to adapt, and this adaptation has allowed us opportunities for interactions that we may not have otherwise had, such as having Vince here all the way from Washington State. And for the first time, our celebration of King Day will include a full day of events. 4 satellite programs will follow this one, programs you can pick and choose to attend. They're staggered throughout the rest of the afternoon into the evening. This virtual format has also allowed us a return engagement from the Martin Luther King Research and Education Institute at Stanford University. And this year, we are honored with the participation of Dr. Claiborne Carson, the Institute's director. On their website, the Institute has produced 21 episodes of the World House podcast, which introduces us to the work of the King Paper Project, all enabling us to learn about Dr. King's life and struggles. It is, however, in a separate documentary that I heard Dr. Carson ask a question which points out the tremendous impact precipitated by Dr. King's decision to come out publicly and express dissatisfaction with Americans' involvement in the Vietnam War, while at the same time pressing our federal government to address poverty in our nation. While King's I Have a Dream speech is arguably his most widely known oration, it is this Beyond Vietnam speech that is unquestionably his most controversial and the subject of a PBS documentary produced by Tavis Smalley, in which he interviews Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson points out to us that through this speech, Dr. King is actually reclaiming his calling as a minister of the social gospel. From early on, King saw his role as being involved with something broader than just civil rights. He understood that we have to deal with mankind as a whole. Solutions lie in our demanding global peace and justice. King stated that we must learn to live together in this one big world house. This course, however, not only earned him the disdain of the white establishment, but also garnered him the ire of some of his own friends and allies. The road he chose proved to be a very lonely path. Dr. Claiborne Carson notes the degree to which King was rejected by wondering aloud if King today, with his post-dream message, would be welcome and invited to speak at his own celebrations. I leave you to contemplate this question. And as we move forward through this program, and with that, I'll turn this over to my youngest of my 3 children, who I must say are my greatest inspiration to get up and out of bed every day.
Hi everyone, I'm Anjali Turner and I'm a senior at Piedmont High School. At last year's MLK celebration, I was on stage with other PHS and MHS students performing a spoken word piece. Let Us Be Dissatisfied was a bridge between the social and economic challenges of Dr. King's times and the glaring problems that young people are troubled by today, like homelessness, equality, and climate change. The mayor of Piedmont, Teddy Gray King, had planned to join us today, but she was unable to because her mother passed away. We send our heartfelt condolences and blessings. We also like to send our heartfelt condolences and blessings to her stand-in for today, Vice Mayor Tim Rudd, whose mother also recently passed away. Vice Mayor Tim Rudd has served on the Piedmont City Council since 2014. Professionally, he is an urban planner and architect, and he was recently the lead city designer for the city of San Jose. Tim Rudd, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the City of Piedmont, welcome to everyone here today. I'd like to thank PADC for organizing and co-sponsoring this event. We're so grateful to PADC for your ongoing leadership in advancing equity here in Piedmont. As you heard, Mayor King cannot be here today due to a family emergency. For her and for me and for many of us, the last year has been sorely trying. It has tested our strength as a nation and as a community. Nearly all of us at this point have friends or loved ones whose lives, health, or livelihoods have been taken or compromised by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as with many things, the impacts of the pandemic have fallen hardest on those in the greatest need. And we have more challenging months and seasons ahead. And since the election, in particular, we've seen the fundamental basis of our democracy challenged. So in coming together here today, we acknowledge our dissatisfaction with the progress to date and acknowledge the hard and important work we have to do to bend the long arc of the moral universe toward justice, to paraphrase Dr. King. As former General Eric Holder and many others have noted, that arc doesn't bend by itself, but rather it only bends when people work to bend it. Last summer, we saw that work happening when, in outrage at the ongoing state-sanctioned injustice, violence, and murder against African Americans and other people of color, the Black Lives Matter movement arose to bend that arc and raise awareness about the need for change. For its part, the Piedmont City Council adopted a resolution condemning racism and pledging to examine the city's institutional policies and procedures, and to participate in public discourse about how and where we can make changes aimed at addressing systemic racism that may reside in our current practices. PADC, the Piedmont Racial Equity Campaign, and others have raised awareness about institutionalized racism throughout Piedmont's founding and history. We're working on a concept for a physical marker, such as an interpretive plaque, to acknowledge Piedmont's first African-American residents, Sidney and Thelma Deering. And we know that we have much, much, much more to do. So today's theme is very fitting. Let us be dissatisfied, using our power to bend the arc. Our power. That means us, all of us. So this is Piedmont's 24th annual MLK celebration. The city is proud to co-sponsor this event with PADC to honor Coretta Scott King's vision for the holiday, that it be substantive as well as symbolic, a day of reflection, a day of teaching nonviolent philosophy and strategy, a day of getting involved in nonviolent action for social and economic progress. So without further ado, let's continue with our great program for today. I'm incredibly honored to introduce the next two speakers who need no introduction. Their bios are in the program as well. First, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the East Bay's progressive champion in the House of Representatives. Congresswoman Lee regrets that she could not be here live today due to the crisis in Washington, but she has provided pre-recorded remarks on tape. Following Congresswoman Lee, Senator Nancy Skinner, the East Bay's progressive champion in the state Senate, will be speaking to us live. And with that, thank you again for coming today on behalf of the city of Piedmont. And here's the message from Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mayor King, for that very warm introduction and for your tremendous leadership here in Piedmont. Thank you to the volunteer members of the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee for putting together this outstanding event every single year. Your dedication to practicing inclusiveness and promoting diversity within Piedmont and the Bay Area, it's truly inspiring. Let me acknowledge the Piedmont City Council and my good friend, Dr. Claiborne Carson from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, whose work continues to support Dr. King's life and the movements that he inspired. And of course, thank you to all of our talented artists and their beautiful performances. Lastly, thank you all for joining today to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our drum major for peace and justice. This year, we will mark the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, a tragic day that forever changed our entire nation. With every generation, we attempt to gain new insight, techniques, talents, and understandings. We grow, develop, and evolve. However, what has not changed is the premise of Dr. King's teachings. What has changed is the way we engage and implement them. And as we saw 2 weeks ago, when those who stormed the Capitol in a coup attempt, they were allowed to roam the streets freely. And peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters are met with excessive force. There remains a profound inequity of a broken system, and this was just another example of how systemic racism manifests itself in the United States of America. Not only were members of Congress forced to evacuate, but also Capitol support staff and maintenance workers were forced to evacuate because Trump and members of the Republican Party continued their charade and enraged their supporters. That is the truth. Hardworking people of color, primarily African Americans, who are the descendants of enslaved Africans who built the Capitol, they had to clean up the destruction from white supremacists. That's a sad illustration of the systems of injustice that are alive and well today. Let the events of the past month, and yes, the last 4 years, remind us why we must continue to fight for racial equity, equality, and justice. Today's event theme, let us be dissatisfied, using our power to bend the arc. It's inspired by Dr. King's 1967 speech, Where Do We Go From Here? As Dr. King's speech drew to a conclusion, he said, let us be dissatisfied until integration is not seen as a problem, but as an opportunity to participate in the beauty of diversity. Dr. King's dream, it will continue to live on in the wonderful activists, our workers, and our young people who understand that there is an urgency to our time. As Dr. King reminded us, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but it comes through continuous struggle. And so it's imperative that we continue to be dissatisfied, to struggle, to agitate, and to demand equality and justice for all. As we seek to bring Dr. King's dream to fruition, we must continue to be dissatisfied and demand that our voices be heard. As Dr. King's words echo today and every day, let us realize that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Thank you for your commitment. And as our beloved warrior, the late Congressman John Lewis, reminded us, let us continue to make good trouble.
I don't see Vice Mayor Rood, and I guess I'm supposed to start, so I will. Good morning. It's still morning, not yet noon. I'm Nancy Skinner, State Senator for our East Bay area, including Piedmont. And I really appreciate Piedmont continuing to every year have a celebration like this and an event that really brings the community together to I think, deeply engage in Dr. King's teachings and legacy, which I think is continually important. And I want to give acknowledgement to Congresswoman Lee for her remarks, as always, beautiful, insightful, and spot on. I have been reflecting a lot in recent, since Trump got elected, but most recently in the last period of time, the last couple of weeks, watching the incredible work of, for example, Stacey Abrams and other Black leaders in Georgia who basically took it upon themselves and for multiple years have focused on engaging voters in Georgia, especially Black voters, and defying their own state's basic rules that tried to prevent those voters from voting. And of course, if you are in a situation where laws and other practices basically try to denigrate your vote or prevent your vote, it is very discouraging. And then for that and multiple reasons, you may not be registered in the same numbers as as white people, for example. And so what Stacey Abrams and other Black leaders did in a variety of organizations was really flip that. And we saw the consequence with the outcome of the Senate election in Georgia, and also Georgia's support of Biden for president versus for Trump. And I reflected on this because I think it's very important to look at their work through the lens of Dr. King's teachings. But I think also, of course, the attack on our Capitol. And what I would say about that, and I think that the choice of let us be dissatisfied is the correct theme right now. Because in Dr. King's, towards the last couple of years, I don't want to say couple, probably 5 years of his life, he focused much more on the economic inequities and how those economic inequities that are so rooted in our country are so tied to our racist legacy and our systemic racism, and how we'll never be able to undo that economic disparity that creates such poverty, not only amongst Black Americans, but amongst all Americans of color, and now, unfortunately, a larger and larger number of white Americans, that we'll never be able to fix that until we confront, acknowledge, and own the racist and slavery legacy that in effect supports those policies. And those are difficult, I think, for us to deal with as Americans. But I feel that Dr. King's, if you read the entire "Where Do We Go From Here" speech, he really confronts it very deeply. But I also want to say that I was very inspired, well, his notion that we need to lead with love, that hate is too great a burden to bear, and that I have decided to love. So let me point out the necklace that I'm wearing, which hopefully you can see. It's a heart. Now, on last Thursday, I was recently named the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, California State Senate Budget Committee, and I chaired my first budget hearing last Thursday. And I chose to wear this necklace because I had planned to tweet that I was very honored to have gotten this new appointment, and that my plan was to lead with love and to view my role as the budget chair through the lens of love, and whether our budget decisions and our budget priorities, in fact, put that first. And that means the needs of people. But I did not end up doing that tweet, because during that hearing, those of us in the hearing room, there were public members, unfortunately, who threatened our lives and made direct violent threats against us. Now, those people feel very empowered right now because of Trump and basically his welcoming and his solicitation of violent threats. And what I reflected on in the speech of Dr. King's was was towards the end of it, where he said, "The road ahead will not always be smooth. There will still be rocky places of frustration and meandering points of bewilderment. There will be inevitable setbacks, and there will be those moments when the buoyancy of hope will be transformed into a fatigue of despair. Our dreams will sometimes be shattered and our ethereal hopes blasted. We may again, with tear-drenched eyes, have to stand before the bier of some courageous civil rights worker, and I will say here, some courageous person of any sort, whether they were killed by police violence or another circumstance, but where some courageous person whose life will be snuffed out by the dastardly acts of bloodthirsty mobs, as we saw in the Capitol. But difficult and painful as it is, we must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. Now, I took those words to heart and I read those because when I think of that long arc that Dr. King talks about, it is not surprising that we in America would have elected an explicitly racist president like Trump directly after we experienced our first Black president. That is not at all either unexpected or, and what I am hoping, and in trying to look at that long arc, is that as horrible and disastrous as it has been, that it represents a reckoning, and over time will be viewed, over history will be viewed as a time where America, in its progress to try to understand the implications of slavery and the deeply racist structure that we have put into our laws and so many of our institutions, that this is not the beginning by any means, but it is another step in our confrontation of that, our understanding, and our willingness to change it. And so that's how I view this time. That's how I try to take hope from it. And I would just end with that I really recommend that everyone read this book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste. She is a brilliant writer. She is a beautiful storyteller, and she makes these things she helps us to understand all of the implications of America's systemic racism in a way that then we can act on, and does not just cause us to feel to be paralyzed. So I will leave it at that, and I will thank you very much for inviting me and for setting up this celebration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your powerful words, Senator Skinner. Next up is a tape performance of Destiny Arts Youth Performance Company. I'm actually really glad that they're back, because when they performed at last year's MLK celebration, I wasn't able to watch them perform because I was backstage waiting to perform with the Diversity Club. And I'm really excited to see what they're sharing with us this time. And the piece that we're about to see is one of 2 Destiny Arts performances we'll see today. This one is called What Color is Your Freedom?
What color is your freedom? Growing up, I was taught that freedom was one thing: white. White snow, the white light at the end of the tunnel, the pearly white gates of heaven, white picket fences, white diamonds. Why couldn't freedom be other colors? What was wrong with my freedom being a little different? What if my freedom was yellow? Sitting in sunflower fields, eating lemon pound cake. A quilt of amber, what if my freedom was yellow? Like gold speckled suns and buttery cornbread. Taxi cabs and Beyonce's lemonade. Or what if my freedom was blue? Like midnight air on an ocean, a sea of stars, and a kiss from Yamaya. What if my freedom was blue? Like morpho butterflies and sapphire geodes. Blue like the 7th planet from the sun and your favorite pair of Levi jeans. Blue like Dory and the best flavor of Otter Pops. Morning glories and relaxed on a mood ring. Or what if my freedom was red? Like picnic blankets and juicy ripe watermelon. Like the love produced by a phoenix and a cardinal. What if my freedom was red? Like wishing wells filled with maraschino cherries and red vines. Red like childhood memories of finger painting in Elmo. Or what if my freedom was black? Like family reunions and collard greens, cocoa butter and porch swings, black like Panthers and resistance, black like Sunday morning sermons and usher gloves, black like Octavia, like Audrey, like Baldwin, black like Malcolm's dreams and Martin's vision, black like Mandela's hope, black like Eric, Sandra, and Oscar, black like lives that matter, Black like second lines and southern draws. Black like Geechee, like Gullah, like the Bayou. My freedom is black. My black freedom is beautiful like Nina, like Ella, like Billy. It's fierce like Ferguson. It's strong like Mayweather. My black freedom don't die. It multiplies. And when my black freedom says, say it loud, it replies, my black freedom is youthful, like scraper bikes and turf battles on BART trains. My black freedom dances, bone breaks, and pirouettes. It stomps and hollers and proclaims its joy. To the heavens, to God, to Allah and Oshun, my freedom is existence. My freedom is self-determined. My freedom is black.
How creative and inspirational. It's our young adults, our youth, our future. Now we shall hear from Dr. Claiborne Carson after a brief introductory film clip with features Dr. King and footage of Coretta Scott King in a meeting with Dr. Carson so many years ago. Following our presentation from Dr. Carson, he will be joined by UC Berkeley journalism professor David Thigpen for a question and answer session assisted by August Thigpen, David's daughter.
I have a dream. We shall overcome.
I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace.
We as a people will get to the promised land. We want to be free.
I'm Claiborne Carson, professor of history at Stanford University and director of the Martin Luther King Research and Education Institute. It's hard to believe it's been 30 years since that phone call from Coretta Scott King. That was in January of 1985. And I still remember when we spent that evening talking about the possibility of me becoming editor of Martin Luther King's papers.
I must say that I was very impressed with him as the right person to direct this project. It's a very, very exciting time for us.
One thing I've learned in these 30 years of working on Martin Luther King is that he's not just a historical figure. He's very much in the present.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
There is obviously a Martin Luther King who died in 1968. But there's also a Martin Luther King legacy that he left behind and that is continuing to unfold. And we can actually shape the King legacy. And that's what I see us doing in the 21st century. Good morning. I guess it's almost afternoon now. And one of the things that always happens when I'm part of a larger program is that I kind of hold my breath because I feel like the person who would have been asked to give a speech after Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. No one would have wanted to follow him. And I feel that way in terms of the musical events that you've just seen and all of the other presentations. I'm already crossing off things. Oh, that's already been said. I don't need to say that. It's been said better by, for example, the young people who were just on the screen before. But in any case, I'm going to try to just reflect a bit on where I think we are. And, this last year has been such a year of hope and also a year of despair. Hope coming in the form of young people getting together and saying, we're not going to tolerate this anymore in terms of the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And yet we also see an election so close that indicates that the nation is very much divided over the answer to King's last question, where do we go from here? And so I think I'm going to take that as the starting point. It's been mentioned in his last book, and I do recommend that everybody who's watching this take a look at that book. It still has a great deal of relevance. I call it King's unanswered question. Where do we go from here? And when we take that apart, we see that it is a very challenging question. And I think that there are three crucial words in that question that we have to address. And I'll take the middle one. Who are we? You know, that question has to be asked by every American and probably has over the past year. Who are we as Americans? We can't decide the question of where we are going to go until we decide who we are. And that's a complicated question in a nation that not just now, but throughout its history has been divided. You know, we did have a historically bloody civil war in this country. And we've had what was called the Southern strategy, this notion that how do you drive millions of Americans to resist change? And, you know, the 1964 election in this country, in which Lyndon Johnson won by a landslide, it was the last election in which a majority of white Americans voted for a Democrat. It hasn't happened since, and it didn't happen in the last election. Indeed, President Trump, actually, I won't use that phrase any longer after this week, but President Trump won more votes than any other presidential candidate, with one exception, and that is Joe Biden. In other words, he's the most successful Republican candidate in the history of this nation. So I think that our job of answering that question, who are we, in that question, where do we go from here? And King, I think, also reminds us with the last word in that question, where is here? We have to assess where we are now. Where King was at the time he asked that question was after the passage of civil rights legislation. It was a time of great hope. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Great Society programs, the War on Poverty, the student loan programs, Medicare, so many programs that seemed to offer hope that America was moving in a more progressive direction. And yet at the same time, we saw the intensity of the reaction against those changes. And in a way, that's where we've been. So King is reminding us that that's the starting point, and we still haven't gone very much beyond that starting point. We're not talking about going back and passing a new Voting Rights Act. We already did that. We're not talking about a new Civil Rights Act. We already did that. We're talking about moving beyond those kinds of reforms. And that's going to be very difficult. So that gets us to the where. And, you know, after we address the question of who we are and where we are now, we have to decide what is our common future. How are we going to decide what is the goal? And who are we going to get to that goal with? And so I think that there's a reason why we haven't answered King's question. It's difficult. It's challenging in a nation like ours. But I think one of the things that we've tried to do in terms of our mission at the King Institute and at the project that I've launched, the World House Project, is we take seriously King's metaphor that he uses in that book. And he imagines a world house that we've inherited. And of course, that world house is the planet Earth. And that's the place we're going to be for the indefinite future until we can travel to another place to live. So we have to take care of this inherited house. And it gives us two options. One of them is chaos. And we've seen instances of that in the last few weeks. That option is quite open and, and almost a realistic option that we'll have chaos in the world. But it's also the option of community and how do we build community. So I'm very happy to be with you as you address this in your community, that all communities, all cities, all states, all nations need to address that question of how do you build community capable of living in the World House productively and peacefully. And that's why we need to be educated. I don't think that people are born necessarily with that knowledge of how to live productively and peacefully in a World House. And it's going to take a great deal of education, and it's going to be global education. One of the advantages we have here in California is the communications revolution that took place right here in this state. The greatest communications revolution in the history of the world. Right here in Silicon Valley, we developed the means to bring the world together. Just every week, I have a meeting in which people from all parts of the world participate. And we can talk with each other, we can see each other, we can communicate ideas in ways that would have been inconceivable just a few years ago. So we have the technology, we have the knowledge to bring the world together. The real question is how we use technology. Technology is neutral. It doesn't take sides. It can be used by people to oppress others. It can be used by people to liberate themselves and others. So that's the choice that we have, is how do we use the technology that we're using right now? How, so I can be at my home and talking to people in Piedmont, and actually on this very day, I'm conducting a webinar of my own in which I was just talking to a person in South Africa, and we're able to see each other, communicate with each other, participate in each other's celebrations, just as I was able to participate in the celebration of the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth. They're able to come in India and join us in the celebrations of Martin Luther King's birth. So this, to me, is the promise of our time. I hope we can use it. I hope that you will find out more about the King Institute and our efforts to bring about this World House Education project, and give us ideas, work with us, and work with other organizations that are trying to accomplish this same thing. So congratulations on your celebration. As I said, I feel like I'm coming in almost breaking into the party with a speech when people are doing much more interesting things with music and poetry and other things. So I hope that you will use this as an opportunity to celebrate Martin Luther King's life. But the best way of celebrating it is to live according to his principles and answer that still unanswered question, where do we go from here? Thank you very much for having me, and I hope you will continue with your celebration.
Thanks so much for that, Professor Carson, and we're really pleased to have you here today. So now we're going to turn to a Q&A. So good morning, my name is David Thigpen. I'm a faculty member at UC Berkeley in the School of Journalism.
And I'm August Thigpen, and I'm a junior at the Piedmont High School.
So before
Good to see both of you.
Before we begin, we want to say if there's time at the end of this session, we will take some questions from the audience, and there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your questions there.
So I will take the first question. So hello, Professor Carson. We are delighted to have you here today. So in schools and communities that are not diverse, what do you think the challenges are when you spread King's message?
Well, I think you've raised a very important question, because I think the best way you can learn to be in community with people unlike yourself is to be around them. And we segregate ourselves. Our neighborhoods are segregated. I mean, one of the points that King made during his lifetime is that I think he said 11 o'clock Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. So we worship in very separate ways. And I think that the challenge to us is to try to broaden our circle and use technology as one of the means to do that. To be able to look upon somebody in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world as your friend, as someone you have maybe had a virtual relationship with, but a real relationship in terms of caring for that person, understanding that person's life. And so I think that would be the challenge for many people. And I think for people of your generation, a lot of what I think we saw represented in the Black Lives Matter movement is that you're more likely to grow up in a more diverse environment than your parents or grandparents. And that's one of the realities of the changes that have occurred. So I think that's one of the reasons why younger people are more open to that idea of thinking of themselves living in a world house. So that's what I would respond, is that we're seeing signs of it. We just need to encourage it.
Thank you. And for my next question, how has the way you have taught or conveyed Dr. King's message changed over the years?
Oh, that's a very good question. It changed a lot. You know, I've taught more people by far in the last 10 years than in all my previous career as a teacher, by far. And I guess you know the reason for that is that my teaching is increasingly online. That right now you can go and take a course on Martin Luther King online that I would have taught to, a handful of students in a Stanford classroom and years before. So that it's possible now to have much further reach and get people who could never be in a Stanford classroom because they can't afford it, because they maybe did not get admitted there. But now I can teach a course actually better than anything I can teach in a classroom online. And it's available for free. And that's just the beginning. We're every single day we're developing new ways of teaching online to make it more effective and to spread it. Obviously, one of the limitations of that is the digital divide, that not everyone has as much access to education online. But that's something that we can change. That's something that can be a major role that President Biden can play. We talk about infrastructure and how infrastructure building can create jobs and create new wealth. Well, our digital infrastructure really needs to be developed to make sure that it reaches everybody. And just in the same way that, that making a long distance telephone call used to be a very costly thing that not very many people could afford, and especially an international call. Now I can talk to somebody, and I just an hour ago, talking to somebody in South Africa, and it doesn't cost me anything. It doesn't cost him anything. The only thing that is necessary is to build that infrastructure so that there's Wi-Fi access.
Professor Carson, it seems clear that one of Dr. King's points of genius was that he was a wonderful coalition builder. And I'm wondering if that is equally as important today, and if so, how are we doing at it?
Oh my gosh, yes, that's vitally important. One of the things that we're doing today, and it's not too late to take part in it, is for the last 4 days we've made a wide variety of films available to people who just go to our website and register for them, and they can watch them for free, as I said. And I think that we're prepared. Would you remind me of the question? I mean, I think I was emphasizing what we are doing right
Sure.
now, but
Dr. King was so successful at coalition building. That seems to have been
yeah.
to his. I'm wondering how we're doing with that today.
Well, I think that what he suggested was something that is illustrated, I think, in some of the films, and that is the civil rights movement was a coalition. The anti-apartheid movement was a series of coalitions across national boundaries. These movements indicated the power of people if they are engaged in coordinated activity. Just think of this, of what happened in South Africa. That could not have happened from within South Africa. It took people around the world putting pressure on business institutions, saying, why are you doing business with apartheid? Putting pressure on governments, ultimately getting the United States to pass sanctions legislation against South Africa. So what that suggests is something we've known for a long time, and that is, don't invest, don't buy evil practices, don't support them, boycott. And a boycott, I remember when I was going to college, there was a boycott of grapes. And, so I love grapes. But I gave it up for a few years in order to get change for farm workers. And, that indicates the power that people have if they coordinate their activities with other people who want to achieve the same goal. And that gets back to that King question that I talked about of who are the we? Is if you can define a community of people who have values that you share, then all it's necessary is to coordinate your activities so that you exert power. And one of the ways of exerting power is through the ballot box, but that only happens once every a few years. We need to find ways of exerting power in between elections and every day of the year. And we can do that with our pocketbooks. We can do that with our, kind of verbal pressure, writing letters, all of that sort of thing. So I think coalition building is vitally necessary. And that was one of the things that was so encouraging about the Black Lives Matter movement. It was not just Black people. It was not just Black organizations. If you looked at the protests, you would see that all types of people were involved in them. And that's an encouraging sign, is that there's not that sense that, oh, that's your struggle, and that doesn't have anything to do with me, but rather saying, what can I do to help your struggle? And that can build community.
Okay, I know we don't have a lot of time. I wanted to ask you also, what sort of things do you see here in California that you might find inspiring and make you feel hopeful about our future?
Well, I think one of the things I would point out is that California in some ways has progress much faster than the rest of the country. It's not that we don't have problems here. Uh, any state where thousands of people are leaving because they can't afford to live here, that's a problem. We're even people who have lived here for a long time, will their children and grandchildren be able to live here? So, but I think that California, at least there's a recognition among most of the people in public office that there are a set of problems that they should be dealing with. Now, I don't think they deal with them as fast as I would want, but at least we don't have as much of a defense of the status quo. We are in a state that recognizes that change is coming, that is open to technology, wants to bend it, use that to bend the arc of the universe, the moral arc. And so I think that there's some hopeful signs, but I think that we have to recognize that we've got problems right here in this state of people of a particularly economic divide, and we need to develop solutions to that.
Okay, and I think we've only got time for one last question. I wanted to ask you, so do you expect leadership in moving Dr. King's principles forward to come from the top down or from the bottom up?
Oh, always from the bottom up. I mean, it's rarely. I mean, one of the things that happens as you grow older, unless you really protect yourself against it, is that you get more invested in the status quo and more fearful of change that's going to disrupt the status quo for you. If you're living a comfortable life, you want it to stay comfortable. So I think it's always going to come from the bottom up, and in many cases from young people to old people. I think that there's less of a sense among young people that because things are the way they are, they should be the way they are, or that should be the way they are. And I think that's one thing about what happened after George Floyd's murder, is that many people my age, if George Floyd had been murdered and we were relying on people over the age of, say, 30 or 40 years old to react to that, I don't think we would have had a movement, because people my age would say, oh, I've seen that before. That's been going on for a long time. I mean, maybe not as graphically, and maybe one of the things that was so different about it is that you could see it happen. You don't often see a person in authority killing another person, but it was young people who said, look, that's not my reality. Maybe you've seen this before, maybe you're going to let it go, but I'm not, because this is, something that greatly offends me. And I think that perspective of just because it hasn't been changed in the past doesn't mean it can't be changed in the present. And young people are more likely to believe in the possibilities of change, more likely to believe that they can make a difference in the world, and that's great. So I think it's going to come from bottom up. Don't always look for existing leaders, established leaders, to provide guidance. Um, I think that young people need to get President Biden's ear, make sure that he recognizes that the votes of young people elected him, the votes of young people changed the Congress, and he has to respond in ways that will keep them loyal and supportive of his administration. So I hope his ears are open, and that but I'm sure that the voices of young people that, like we saw before, they will open his ears because they're not going to stop shouting. And I think that that's very good for American democracy because, you know, the young people have more of a stake in it than older people, quite frankly. They're the ones who are going to live in this uncertain future of 10 and 20, 30 years from now. If there is, they're the ones who are going to have to live in a ever-changing world house. And so I think that they're the ones who understand that that's going to be a difficult challenge.
Professor Carson, thank you so much. This has been inspiring and informative. We're unfortunately out of time, so we won't get to take any audience questions this time, but we really appreciate hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And now I can go back to my other webinar that's still going on. So I sure hope the rest of your day is as wonderful as the part I got to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. And now we'd like to bring back the incredible Destiny Arts for another video called #StandWithBlackYouth.
Ain't no power like the power of the youth, 'cause the power of the youth don't stop. Ain't no power, Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Say his name! What's her name? Breonna Taylor! Say his name! George Floyd! Say her name! Breonna Taylor! What's his name? George Floyd! What's her name? Breonna Taylor! Say his name! George Floyd! Say her name!
So amazing. So what do you think, Anj?
Amazing. I I wish I was there during that protest. Well, not even protest, but gathering.
So, you know, the images that we saw displayed just bring to mind notions for me of the greater East Bay. Almost any random Sunday walking around Lake Merritt, as you, me and your sister have done, just as we did yesterday, there are so many microcosms around the lake, just such diversity right there. So that was quite inspirational for me.
We saw a horse yesterday. We were walking Lake Merritt.
Speak of diversity. So now we'll look forward to what must be done to create the change that we want to see.
So on that note, next I'd like to introduce filmmaker and visionary anti-racism educator Shakti Butler. Her works build on King's legacy by focusing on building racial equity through structural change. And so our learning journey here with Dr. Butler will set us all on a course for taking action in our own schools and communities.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Do I need to start over? Okay. So it's with deep respect that I welcome you all. Every year, Martin Luther King celebrations
Right now, we're having a few technical difficulties, which we'll try to resolve. And our video connection with Shakti Butler is not functional. David, were there any questions that the audience posed that we might address? All right. So let's see, Anj.
Yeah.
I understand that there's some other activities that are going to be happening this afternoon.
Yeah, there's a couple other activities. There's a couple other events. I believe it's 4.
Yeah, next up, I think PREC is going to present a forum on nice white parents. I believe that starts at
I'd have to double check.
1:30. It goes from 1:30 to 2:30. And then at, let's see, 2 o'clock.
Is the POPs event.
And what will they focus on?
Is segregation still alive? So we'll be reviewing a podcast and discussing that in breakout rooms and then in a group setting as well.
And then at 3 o'clock
is the BSU. So the BSU will be performing, or not performing, the BSU will be going over a video that we took discussing what we're dissatisfied with, what we're satisfied with, and what MLK Day means to us. And then
at 5 o'clock is actually a podcast presentation by my son, Aksumawi Turner, who has assembled a group of panelists who will discuss various aspects of the where do we go from here speech, dealing with power and love. They will be joined by Ms. Kashani, who is a high school
econ teacher at Piedmont High School.
Okay. And so we're looking forward to all those events. We invite our listening audience to tune in to whichever items tend to interest them. You can go to PADC's web space and there'll be links to those activities. I suggest at this point that we move forward to our next speaker, who will be the co-president of PADC, Jennifer Long.
Good afternoon, everyone. What an amazing day. I'm sitting here with my son, looking out at the bright sunshine, and I have to believe that Dr. King and our ancestors are looking down upon us and thinking we are doing something with his legacy and their legacy. My name is Jennifer Long, and I'm the co-president of the Piedmont Anti-Racism and Diversity Committee. Before we move into the final piece of this program, I'd like to again thank the City of Piedmont for their support for this event. I'd also like to thank Lois Corin for setting us on this course, MCs Richard Turner and Angelique Turner, interviewers David Thigpen and August Thigpen, tech support Nathan Ball, and many volunteers, including Julie Chang, also my co-president Sheila Lunig, and newly elected school board member Veronica Anderson Thigpen. Before we move into the last piece of the program, I'd like to read a quote from Dr. King that I think is relevant and has been referenced throughout today. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against the love. Dr. King's words and actions demand that we each work on our self-reflection, that we rise above the petty, that we move beyond social constructs that limit our ability to see each other's humanity. It is imperative that we turn the world over better than we found it. And with that, I'm going to turn this mic over to my firstborn son, Taj Rebel.
Hello, my name is Taj Rebel. I'm a junior at Bishop O'Dowd High School. And before I start, I would just like to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to do the call of action on this day. So there are many things that all of us can do to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy and help to stop racism. We can honor Dr. King by following his practices, such as non-violently protesting, advocating for what you believe in, and never giving up. Also, we all need to do our part in helping to combat racism, and there are multiple things that we all can do to help this. Number one, we can send letters to politicians locally, statewide, and countrywide, asking them to take action to dismantle laws that disenfranchise citizens and to create laws that help support human expression. Number two, you can advocate for people in need. Number three, you can help to organize. You can help by donating to organizations that help to combat racism. And number four, you can call out racism when you witness it and be an ally to people of color. How we exercise our choices and choose to support each other, respect one another, and give each other the dignity we deserve is how we are people. Thank you.
Thank you, Taj. Today's programming is not aimed solely at recognizing the greatness of Dr. King. Today's programming is designed to give us the tools to confront our own darkness and to move us to unity and connection and to move into the light. PADC's work and partnership with other organizations, with local leaders and community members is aimed at creating a more inclusive Piedmont. We want to thank everyone for coming today. We hope to see you next year for additional program and also later on today with all the different panels that we have continuing throughout the day. But I would strongly encourage that we be doing this work all year long. PADC will have additional activities throughout the year. You can go to padc.com for information. So we look forward to seeing you either later today or throughout the year. Thank you very much. And we will be showing one more video of John Lewis. Thank you.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people motivated simply by human compassion laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself, that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert-goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
Thank you. And that concludes today's programming. So in the words of John Lewis, let's all get in some good trouble. Thank you for joining us today. Take care.